So we're ready to go? Red yucca is the common name for it. And I see this all the time down in Phoenix. There's certain varieties that actually get pretty big. Well, the architects, they spec them about 1 foot from the sidewalk or 2 foot from the sidewalk. Well, all of a sudden they're growing into the sidewalk. This plant by itself, once it's planted, other than some water, you never need to touch it again other than pruning off the dead flower spikes once a year if you want. But if it's in the wrong place where it's crowding into a sidewalk or a place you don't want a plant to crowd into, that means you're doing a lot of pruning. And down in Phoenix, they take these and they look like pineapples when they're done, which is just atrocious. That's not how they should look. So the big key to low maintenance is the right plant in the right location, so it doesn't become a maintenance issue with pruning and where you're having to touch it quite a few times a year. Low to moderate water needs are, I think, another definition of a low maintenance plant, not a real high water user. One-time planting, something you plant once. You're not replanting it every year like perennials and stuff, or annual stuff like that. So shrubs, perennials, even a tree in the right location and the right tree that's not a messy tree for the right location is a low maintenance tree, especially one that doesn't require a lot of water. One that has a fairly long life, you plant it, it's there, longer than you're going to be alive, or it's there for at least five years, something like that. So like some of your perennials, you might need to replant out every 5 years or so, but you're planting it once and it's good for quite a few years. Will wildlife eat it? That's another issue. If you're planting it in the wrong spot, wildlife are eating it, kind of becomes a maintenance issue. Building a barrier around it, or you're frustrated with it because it's not doing what you want because it's getting pruned every week by the deer or dug up by the javelina, etc. So really minimal maintenance, what I call no touch or one touch a year, basically. So you're not out there all the time. A lot of gardeners love to be out there every day, every week, fiddling with deadheading flowers, a little bit of pruning, stuff like that. And that's great. And there's some of us that, I don't want to be out there all the time, weekly or every other week having to do something with my garden. And I just want something I can plant. It's there, it looks good, and I don't have to spend a lot of time with it. So I'm going to talk about basically very low maintenance plants, low maintenance plants, and easy plants, which have minimal maintenance to them. You may think about in your yard, you might want different zones. You want a real easy to care area. And then maybe in your back patio or something, you want something with a little more color, a little more, I call them fluff plants, so to say. Might require a little bit more work to them, but still low maintenance. So you may consider that in your yard, having different zones, or you can do a little mix and match. One thing with that is being careful with water zones. So you might have to run different irrigation zones to different types of plants, depending on their water needs. So we'll start out with some what I call very low maintenance plants. Plant them once, really don't have to do a whole lot with them. No pests bother them. Wildlife generally doesn't bother them, etc. Some of these are native to here. Some may be native to other dry areas that take the heat and the cold, etc. So we'll start out with the obvious. I'm going to move over here. It's things like agaves. This is agave perii. It's actually native to the central highlands of our state here and parts of Utah. A true desert plant, takes a lot of heat, takes a lot of cold, which is, we need it for here to at least take down to 0 degrees, maybe a little below 0 degrees. You plant this, you don't really have to do anything else to it. However, it does get, don't think it's going to stay this size. Don't plant it in a spot this big. It's going to overgrow it, and you're going to brush up against it and really scratch yourself or something like that. So, once again, it's location, the right spot for it. It needs to be a spot that's at least 3-4 feet wide, so people aren't brushing up against something that's as prickly as this. The hesperellas, already talked about a little bit. They come in different colors, yellow, pink, red, different sizes. This one's coral. This is a larger growing one. But once you plant it, you don't ever have to worry about it again. Very low water. I still say watering, even some of the drought-tolerant stuff we're going to talk about, native stuff, until it gets established, it does need water. And if we have like last winter was bone dry, we didn't really get rain again until we got into the monsoon season, which was really good. You still need to water some of this stuff, once a month, once it's established, okay? But once again with this, it's location, don't put it in a real narrow spot. It's going to get too big. Luckily, they came up with a new variety called brake lights. And the name brake lights is, it's got very bright red flowers to it, and this is a dwarf hesperella. So this one can be planted if you have a smaller spot that's only 3 feet wide. This one will do fine there. It's not going to overgrow its bounds and become a maintenance issue where you have to prune it. In my mind, a lot of plants, they look best if they're allowed to grow in their natural form and not pruned into squares and, things like that. Of course, we have our true cactus, our barrel cactus type Echinopsis. A lot of these, like this one is claret cup is the common name of it. It's native to our area here. Beautiful little red flowers on it. Once again, you plant it, you're done with it. Prickly pear, there's several varieties of prickly pear. They grow very well here, take our cold. Most of them have yellow flowers. Ones that grow here, there's some choyas that grow here. They have beautiful pink flowers to them. And they are, they get taller, but there's several varieties of choyas that do really well here with beautiful pink flowers. Once again, just location. Make sure they're in the right spot. You don't want people having interaction with these except from a distance. And wildlife generally will not bother these at all. The javelina or deer may take some of the apple pears off, something like that. That's generally about it. Then you can get into, these aren't native, but they're very drought tolerant and they do extremely well in our area. The dazzlerians, this is called Mexican, Mexican grass tree. And it gets up to about probably 3 feet, maybe 4 feet at the very most by 3 feet. It eventually will get a spire, a flower on it that comes up. It does not die after it blooms. You just cut the spike off. Unlike an agave, it may take 10 years before it blooms, but when it blooms, an agave, the plant itself, the mother plant will die. The good thing is it has produced usually a bunch of pups around it before it ever goes to bloom, so you always have more agaves coming up as well. Your only maintenance to that is 10 years down the road is cutting out the agave that died, but it's 10 years down the road. This is one of my favorites. This is a Yucca gloriosa variegata, very drought tolerant. This one actually takes our cold quite well here. I have 3 of these in my yard. As it ages, it will put on a white spike that goes up about 3 or 4 feet above the plant, but it has to get several years of age before it does that. The only maintenance to this plant would be about once every 2 years. These fronds will kind of start to turn brown, and I just kind of shuck them off. And eventually, as this grows taller, 4 or 5 feet, eventually you have a beautiful stem to it with a variegated top. Pretty slow growing. It's probably going to take 7, 8 years to even get up to 3 feet. This one, I know you see all over the place. It's called Desert Spoon. This is another Dazzlerian. It's related, same genus as this Dazzlerian there. This one has a little more spiky leaves to it. And this one, as it ages, it gets taller too, 4 or 5 feet tall with a big trunk to it. Has beautiful flower spikes to it that go up about 6, 8 feet when it blooms. But once again, it does not die. Plant stays there, but after it's done blooming, just cut the flower stalk off. Interesting side note on this, I don't know if any of you are tequila drinkers or like anything that's similar to tequila, but this is native to northern Mexico, and they make a wonderful drink out of this, the same process they do with agave that they make tequila from, and it's called Sotol, S-O-T-O-L. It's a wonderful drink. And there's only like 2 distillers in northern Mexico that make it. But a little interesting side note on this. This is called a soft leaf yucca pendula. Another easy care, drought tolerant, takes our heat, takes our cold. Gets beautiful white flower spikes on it, about 3 feet above it, that are very large, very showy. Once again, after it's done blooming, it does not die. You just cut the flower stalk off when the flower stalk is done blooming. Easy to care, nothing really bothers it. This is called Yucca rostrata, sapphire skies. Blue beak yucca is the common name on it. This one gets a little bit taller. It'll get up 4, 5, 6 feet eventually. It would take quite a long time to do that in our area here. And once it gets taller, it gets a nice, beautiful trunk to it. Same thing, you kind of every couple of years kind of shuck off the dead leaves that are browning and stuff. But other than that, it's very easy to take care of, and just great area. If you have a really hot area in your yard, this would do really well and takes our cold. Then we get in, there's actually a lot of succulents that are very, very cold hardy. They'll go down to 20 below zero even. Just a few here. This is the red carpet sedum. Makes a great container plant. I have this in my yard. I use it more as a container plant, but I have used it in the ground too. Spreads out as it keeps spreading out. It keeps rooting as it goes. Now, most all the succulents here, they will go dormant in the winter. They'll just kind of die down, mush down. They're not dead. They're just going dormant for the winter time. There's taller varieties of succulents that get taller, red leaves to them. The autumn sedum is one that's real popular. So there's quite a few varieties, and in the springtime, waters will have quite a few varieties. I think they have up to usually 10, 15, sometimes up to close to 20 varieties of succulents in the heat of spring here. Yeah, like I say, there's Some are spreading, some are a little bit taller. They make great container plants. One thing I will say, succulents, the deer, in my experience, do kind of like them. So either have them in a protected part of your yard or a container on your patio, I think is sometimes the best use for succulents here. Unless if you don't have to worry about deer, then you can put them out wherever.
Once they go dormant, do they just then come back in the spring?
Yep.
Is there anything you do?
If sometimes they mush down so much you don't almost have to do anything if you don't want. It just depends how high profile area is where people are, where you're seeing it. You know, if it's not near an area where you're at all the time or something, and area like that, you might want to clean it up after it dies down. Otherwise it'll just come up through it and you'll never know. So,
Jim, I'm going to start this sign-up sheet around.
Okay.
Usually we have a nice printed out one. I didn't get down there to do that because we're kind of doing the camera thing here. But if you put your name and email address on it, what we'll do is we will send you a series of handouts. There's an article that Ken Lane wrote here, probably more towards the spring, on succulents specifically, how to take care of them and so on. And then there's a whole series of handouts on how on low maintenance plants. So a lot of the stuff that Jim's already talked about will be more detailed. Okay, so I'm going to pass this around. Question frequently comes up, well, I'm on your email list anyhow. You need to sign the sheet because we don't send this out to everybody. We just send it out to those people that are in here at the class, and then anybody that's online that gives us our email address.
Do they get future emails too?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
This also does make you part of our what we call our garden club, which gets emails. We never sell an email list to anybody else. It's strictly for our own use. And you'll get like advance notice, for example, when we have our monsoon sale in August. You'll know about it a couple of weeks before the people that read the newspaper, for example. Okay.
Okay. Another very common type of succulent is called hens and chicks. Very common. You may have heard the name hens and chicks. Now, these don't necessarily die down to the ground in the wintertime, though it might kind of shrivel a little bit and just kind of go into a little hibernation in the wintertime here. But the hens and chicks, they're great container plants especially, and you can use these indoors too. But they come in, the form is kind of always like this, like these rosettes. But they come in different colors. Some are more almost a black, very maroon. Some have a multicolor to the foliage, but these are one of my favorites. And hens and chicks, because this is the hen, and then it starts producing all the little plants around it, the chicks. So that's where it gets the name hens and chicks. But these are very hardy. They grow here. They take our cold. They take our summer heat as well. One thing to note on succulents, especially if you're growing them in containers, when we get into the heat of summer when it's really hot, don't water them a lot. They are susceptible to possibly root rot if the soil's kept too wet when the temperatures are hot outside. So they like to dry out a little bit in the summertime. And that way you avoid any root problems. So next I'm going to go into our low maintenance. So what we covered there was very low maintenance. Then we're going to go into low maintenance, and that incorporates a lot of native shrubs as well. This is one here. It's called Apache plume. Grows all over native in our hillsides around here in the central highlands of Arizona. Once this is planted, it really doesn't, once it's established, for the first year or two, even native plants, you do want to give them supplemental water. You can't just stick them in the ground and expect them to survive, especially if you're planting them here in the spring, so to say, when we don't have rain again for 2 or 3 months. It's not going to make it. They're drought tolerant, but that's once they get established. And I will say, if you're concerned about you're in a fire area, something like that, even native plants, giving them moisture, so the moisture content in the wood and the foliage is high as we go into the fire season, May and June, can help them be a little more resistant to fire if you think you live in a fire-prone area. If this were to, just like our native plants out there, come May and June, especially if we've had a poor winter of rain, the moisture content of those shrubs out there, the native stuff, is really, really low, and that's why it's so flammable. So even native stuff, especially if you live in a fire-prone area, you want to give it some supplemental water, especially going into spring and stuff. So come fire season, it has a little more moisture into the plant. This is called Apache plume. Has these beautiful little soft pink little plume flowers on it. And if you ever see them, you've probably seen them not knowing, driving on the 69 or 169 certain times a year. You see these shrubs just covered in a white haze, and that's the Apache plume blooming out there. Overall, they're evergreen. They do go a little dormant in the wintertime, but overall, they're evergreen. Now, plant it in the right spot. You never have to do anything with this. Don't plant it in an area that's only 3 feet or 4 feet wide. You're going to have to prune it, and it's just not going to look good. So this is something that needs 8, 10 feet of space all the way around it, so it can just act naturally, grow naturally. It will grow naturally in just a nice, roundish, shrubby shape, up to about probably 5 feet at the most. Manzanita. We're all familiar with manzanita. This is another extremely low maintenance shrub once it's established. Now this is a tough one. A lot of people tend to kill them when they take them home because they give them too much water. So you got to be a little careful on manzanitas that you don't, once a week water, once you first take them home, is probably enough water for a while. But if you give them too much water or poor drainage, manzanitas have a hard time establishing themselves here. There's several different types. Some are low spreading, some are more like 4 to 5 feet tall. They get little bell-shaped flowers on them with berries afterwards. Overall, the deer may nibble a little bit on some of the new growth sometimes, but they really don't affect it too much. But yeah, one of our more traditional native, very low maintenance shrubs. This is another native, Garryi silk tassel, sometimes called coffee bean, quinine bush. Gets up to about 5 feet here. It's native, takes the cold, takes the heat. Once it's established, very little water, gets kind of inconspicuous flowers. It gets flowers on it, but they're not real showy. But it gets real pretty little blueberries that kind of hang down in a tassel afterwards, which are actually quite attractive. Once again, give it space. Don't plant it in an area that's too small for it. Then we get into some non-native. Kent, I'm going to be over here a little bit. Non-native, but what I would call low maintenance. Once established, don't need a whole lot of water. Potentia, one of my favorites. You see it all around. Gets no more than 3 feet tall. If it's in the right location and you don't have to prune it, it's a very nice looking plant. You put it in a 2 foot by 2 foot area, it's going to grow out of bounds and you have to prune it. And Potentia don't look good pruned to me, so give it the space it needs. Pretty yellow flowers that bloom about 3 months out of the year. You'll have color on this off and on. Deer tend not to bother it. Just a great plant.
Is it a full sun?
Full sun, yes, thank you. Yeah, pretty much everything I'm talking about here so far is all full sun. Potentia, yeah. It's actually, there are certain potentias that are actually native to the Rocky Mountain states, even in parts of northern Arizona and the mountains, there is a native species of potentia as well. So, but there's a lot of hybridized varieties, but the Goldfinger is probably the best one for our area. It does really well here. Another non-native, but fabulous plant for our area. Whoops. I'm falling apart. This is Cotoneaster parrii. It's planted a lot here. Unfortunately, I think it's planted in the wrong location most of the time here. This is a big plant, 8-10 feet tall, 8-10 feet wide, but in its natural state, it just grows in a beautiful little fountain form like that. Beautiful white flowers, beautiful clusters of red berries. That's the way I think this plant looks the best. I see it planted a lot, and they're always shearing it because it's just getting too big for their planting it. The plant does well though where it's at. It serves its purpose as green, evergreen, and fairly drought tolerant once it's established. But I feel for low maintenance, because what's a factor of low maintenance? You know, very little touching, 1 touch a year at the most or something. So you don't want to do something you have to prune a lot. But yeah, this is one of my favorite plants for this area. If it's planted in the right spot, it's a beautiful shrub, but it needs a big space. No, it's pretty fast, yeah, which is nice about it. Which is why a lot of people are attracted to this, because it is a fast-growing shrub. But parrii.
So Jim, the people online can't hear the questions.
Okay.
So could you repeat the
Sure.
question before you answer it?
Okay. Yeah. Last couple questions. Is it how fast does it grow? Grows quite fast. This is another type of Cotoneaster that's well suited to our area called Glaucophyllus. Glaucophyllus, because it kind of has that bluish tinge to it, hue to it, has these pretty little red flowers. And a lot of times anything with this kind of bluish Glaucophyllus foliage, you know, it has very, very small foliage, really means it's very well adapted to heat and dry conditions, etc. So once this is established, it's quite drought tolerant. Still needs water throughout the year though, especially if it's dry. Once again, it's a great shrub in an area where it's got enough space to be. This is another one of my favorite plants for this area. Once again, if it's in the right location. This is gilt edge Eleagnus. It's noted for its beautiful golden foliage. This variety doesn't really have, you know, flowers to speak of, so it's not known for that. It's known for its beautiful bright yellow foliage. Once again, if it's leftward, it needs like 8 feet by 8 feet. You know, let it grow naturally. It's a beautiful, beautiful shrub, and you never have to do anything with it. You don't have to do you don't have to prune it. If you do put it in an area where it's not big enough, you're going to have to do some pruning to it, and it kind of, to me, doesn't look as good. They do have some as you're going out the driveway. You might notice them as you're leaving. They have some of these on the driveway there, and I don't think they prune those. They're just kind of growing natural.
Maybe once a year.
Yeah.
Depends on when Ken gets crazy with his friends.
Full sun, evergreen, drought tolerant. This is Oregon grape, Mahonia compacta. I think this one's compacta. Yeah. No, this is not the compacta variety. It's the regular aquifolium. There is a variety called compacta that only grows about 3 feet tall. This one gets a little bit taller, I don't know, maybe 5 feet here, 3 feet wide or so. Now, this is one that can take a fair amount of shade, but it also can take a lot of sun. So very versatile plant. Also makes a good container plant too. Foliage is a little prickly, so if you're using it as a container plant, kind of want it out of the way in a container where nobody's going to kind of brush up against it or touch it. Beautiful yellow flowers to it in the springtime, And after the flowers, it's followed by beautiful little blueberries to it. I have this in my yard. In the front, I have deer issues. The deer don't bother this. Nothing seems to bother it at all. Slow growing, slow to moderate growing, I should say. But yeah, very easy, very low maintenance plant. This can be a low maintenance plant. Cotoneaster, Coral Beauty. This one spreads out quite a bit, 6 to 8 feet, maybe more. There's a couple other varieties, Eichholt, Streebsfiendling, that grow a little bit lower, but they grow out 6 to 8 feet. So if you got a large area, you need a nice ground cover. Some of the spreading cotoneasters are great, but don't put it 3 feet from an area you don't want it to grow, because you're going to constantly be pruning it back and you're going to have to do maintenance on it. So in the right area, you're spreading cotoneasters, you're a great low maintenance plant. Little white, all of them get little white flowers in the springtime, and they get red berries, followed up by red berries after that. Generally, not too much bothers these. Deer may nibble at them a bit, but they grow so fast, generally, that's really not a problem with them. Full sun is best for them. They will take some shade, light shade, but the more sun, the better for them. Then you can get into your junipers. Junipers in the right location can be very low maintenance in our climate. Once established, junipers are fairly low water too as well. This is the Japanese garden juniper. For a little low spreading one, this is probably one of the better ones for a smaller area. It grows out to about 3 feet roughly. And if you want it in the smaller area, you can, because it grows pretty slow. Maybe once a year you go through and just kind of prune it back a little bit. But otherwise, if you let it grow, it's just a flat green mat for about 3 feet. This is one of my favorites for a low spreading juniper for large areas. It's called Calgary carpet. It's got a real feathery as it grows. This grows out pretty wide, about 6 feet, but it kind of has a real feathery pattern to it as it grows out. Very, very pretty, very attractive. But once again, it needs to be in an area where it's got room to grow. You know, if you plant this where you're pruning it every year to keep it in bounds, it does not look good. So there's a lot of different types of junipers. If they're planted in the right area, mint julep, sea green juniper is a nice big bushy one, fountain shape. Takes really well to pruning, and you see it sheared into topiaries, hedges even, but you know, that's maintenance. So in that case, it's not a low maintenance plant. But if it's in the right area where it's just allowed to be itself, it's a low maintenance juniper. A little more Salvia greggii, you see these all over the place. One of the best plants for our area because deer don't bother it, javelina don't bother it. I have these all over my yard. Come in purple flowers, red flowers, pink flowers, white flowers, a whole array of colors. The autumn sages come in. They get up to about maybe 3 feet at the most. You do have to prune these back once a year. I prune mine back usually in February or January or February. I'll cut them back about down to 6 or 10 inches. But other than that, they're very easy. They do need supplemental water. Hummingbirds love them, especially this year. The sphinx moss, the hawk moss were all over them too. It was just from sun up to sundown, it was the hawk moss and the hummingbirds on my autumn sage this year. So great plant. I love this plant for our area. You can use it as a container plant too. Rosemary is what I'd call another easy plant or low maintenance. Takes a lot of heat. You can use them in a container if you want. Gets little blue flowers on it. You can use them for cooking, etc. There's low growing varieties like Huntington carpet, spreading rosemary. This one's Tuscan blue. It grows a little bit taller, about 3 feet tall, more upright to it. But I would classify rosemaries as pretty low maintenance because it's maybe just once a year you're doing a little pruning on them for shape, and that's it. Other than that, they're very easy. They're good pollinators too because they attract quite a few bees. So it's good for pollinators, for bees.
Especially for cold.
Yes. Yep.
And I noticed the javelinas don't bug it either.
No, I've just never had anything,
Yeah, it's nice.
and I've never heard of anyone having trouble with anything bothering it. But yeah, it takes, it'd go below 0 degrees a bit. They don't use it up in Flagstaff, although I think now they probably could start using it up there in certain areas. Just it's not as cold as it used to be up there. But and then I kind of go into easy or container plants. This is Indian hawthorn. These, need a little more water, so they're just kind of on the edge of what I'd call low maintenance, just because they do need more water than some of the other stuff we talked about. But as far as a plant you don't have to touch, once you've planted it, a lot of your Indian hawthorns, Rhaphiliptus, are great plants because they have overall a naturally small character size to them. This one you get about 2.5 feet, 3 feet maybe. There's some varieties that get up to about 2 feet by 2 feet. Some get a little bit larger. They just naturally grow in a perfect little mound shape if planted in the right area where you don't have to do any pruning on them and make them squared off or something, which they don't look good. So I would classify something like even an Indian hawthorn is an easy low maintenance type shrub here. Nandinas, especially your dwarf types. There's Gulfstream now, there's Sienna Sunrise, Tuscan Flame. Throughout the last 20 years, there's been a lot of cool introductions of Nandinas. This gets up to about 3 feet tall. You never touch it. You don't do anything to it. A couple feet wide. It's, it needs a little more water. That's why I say it's just on that verge of low maintenance, because I like to classify low maintenance as less water. But the Nandinas do need supplemental water. So, you couldn't put this on the same drip zone as you would cactus and yuccas, because it's not going to survive. It's not going to get enough water. So you don't want a different drip zone for something like this, or a couple other things I'll talk about. This also makes a very great low maintenance container plant. It's evergreen, takes a lot of sun, take a little bit of shade. So if you have a big pot, it's a fabulous container plant that's very easy to grow. You don't have to do anything with it. And I will say this about anyone entertaining container gardening or growing shrubs, shrub type plants, especially in containers, is the biggest container that you can afford, carry for your location. It makes container gardening much, much easier the bigger the container. The roots have more air to grow. The container holds moisture a lot longer. It's not affected by heat and cold as much. The bigger the container, the more soil you have in a container. All those factors making it, have a large effect how well plants do in a container. So if you're just trying to put this in a little pot that's the same size as this, it's not going to do as well. It's not going to do what you want compared to if you're putting it in a pot that's, like twice the width of this probably. Then it's a lot easier to grow. It looks good year round.
How long can you keep them in a container?
You could probably, if a large container, a decent sized container, I don't see why this couldn't go 10 years or plus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Perennials still?
Yeah. It's depending on the perennials though. Boxwood, another fabulous container plant, or in the ground. It can be a low maintenance plant in the ground too. A lot of people though use them as kind of a hedge thing where they kind of tend to prune them. But I have 3 of these on my deck that are kind of hiding the neighbors next door, but I got them I got big pots, they're about this big. I have 3 of these in there, and they're up to about 4 feet tall now. I've never pruned them, never done anything to them. They've been in there for about 5 years now, 6 years. So boxwood can make a great container plant as well. Full sun on a hot deck I have them at. They can take a little bit of shade too. Down in Phoenix, they use boxwood quite a bit, but they have to have shade there, or filtered shade. So boxwood can take a fair amount of shade compared to what people think. There's different types. This one's called Green Mountain. I think it's one of the best for our area. It doesn't get that brown hue to it in the wintertime as much. Some of the other boxwood, if you just get straight Japanese boxwood, they kind of get a little bit of a brown hue to them in the wintertime when it gets cold. But they don't lose their leaves. They stay evergreen. But Green Mountain, I think, is one of the best ones for the real cold areas. And most of these are pretty tolerant to wind, too.
I like it.
Another good container plants that are low maintenance. I mean, obviously, I'm not showing you stuff with color here, but just kind of stuff that's easy. You plant it once in the container, and you don't have to really do anything else to it. This is Japanese yew. This one's called dense. Ironically, it's called spreading yew, densiformis, but they call it spreading yew, but it actually kind of grows more in an upright habit, not spreading. So this one actually makes a really good container plant for shade. So if you have a shady area, you want something for for a container, the spreading densiflorous yew is really good for that. And they also have a little dwarf one called emerald spreader. It's smaller, only gets a couple feet tall at the most, and it spreads out. But just pruning it once a year, you can keep it smaller in a container. Good old dwarf Alberta spruce, whether it's in the ground or in a container, very low maintenance. They do get big. I mean, people don't think they'll get 4 feet wide, maybe 5 foot even at the base over time, but they do. So if you're going to plant one of these, you want to make, a lot of people tend to use them kind of on their entryway area, stuff like that. Make sure you've got 6 feet of space for this to grow eventually. Otherwise, it's going to start growing into your entryway. So a lot of people make that mistake. You can put it in a pot, a good sized pot. This will last you 10, 12 years easy in a pot on your deck or out front. They do need water. That's kind of maybe a drawback to the dwarf Alberta spruce, but they do need water. Perennials. I would classify many perennials as easy, low maintenance. Heucheras come in a lot of different colors, varieties for the foliage, flowers. Hostas, I think probably most of you are familiar with hostas. They're very low maintenance. With a lot of your perennials, once they die down, come December, January, you just kind of cut them down to the ground, close to the ground, take all the dead foliage out. That's all you have to do once a year. That's all you have to do. Now you get into some of your more flowering, more vigorous, faster perennials like Sagara, blanket flowers, the Gaillardias. Some perennials do need a little more care to them, so maybe more deadheading, a little more pruning a couple times a year. So they kind of go out of that low maintenance category as far as I'm concerned. But there are several varieties of types of perennials that I would consider pretty low maintenance. And perennials, as they die down every year, but they come back in the spring. So, meets that criteria of plant it once. You don't have to plant it again. Other than, say, a hosta, maybe every 3 or 4 years, you divide them up and you have a whole bunch more hostas. So that's maybe one thing you have to do with some perennials is divide them up depending what type of perennials they are. Then you come here in the springtime, there's probably 50 varieties, different types of perennials they carry here in the springtime for every purpose, shade, sun. For a good low spreading perennial is Vinca. This is Vinca minor, not to be confused with Vinca major. Vinca major is the big leaf one that spreads and grows and grows and grows and grows. And a lot of people, they try to kill it. They have it in their yard because it just is taking over, but it's because it's in the wrong spot. This is Vinca minor. As you can see, it's much smaller leaf, Still has a beautiful little blue flower to it, and it spreads, but it spreads at a much, much slower rate. So if you have a shady area, maybe a little bit of sun, I have mine on the north side of the house, and I planted maybe 6 plants, and it's about a mat of 6 feet wide by 15 feet long now, up against the wall. And it's evergreen year round, takes the cold. When the late summer sun does come around to that side, it seems to take the heat okay. But I wouldn't recommend it for full sun here though. But once again, in the right spot, I have it in the right spot. I just want it to slowly spread in my front yard next to the house. And I never touch it. I don't do anything with it. It does need supplemental water. It does need water throughout the year during the dry season. Also keep in mind, a lot of times our monsoons aren't good monsoons. We've been blessed the last 2 years having really good monsoons that, I was able to turn my water off for weeks at a time, except maybe watering some of my more high maintenance baskets and stuff like that and containers. But a lot of years we don't have good monsoons, and we get an inch here and then 2 weeks later another inch. Well, that's not enough to water your plants here in the summer. So always think about keeping your irrigation on unless we really, really have a good monsoon like last year and this year. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking it's getting an inch of water this week, it's going to be okay. And that might be fine for some of your native stuff. It might do okay with that, but a lot of stuff you have in your yard, it won't do. Even in the wintertime, if we have a really poor snow year like last winter, supplemental watering once a month is beneficial to the plants because our soil just gets too dried out.
You don't need to turn the water off and blow the drip system here?
You do need to. It's your controllers generally. Yeah, your controllers will freeze. So most everyone will turn off their drip irrigation here. Some people will, if you're just using the only drip irrigation, you don't have to blow compressed air out through. If you have more of a closed system like sprinklers, that's a closed system with a PVC pipe and stuff, you have to use compressed air, blow the water out so that doesn't freeze, especially if it's close to the surface.
You could keep another hose going to where you could go and do some stuff if it's
Yeah. Are you new here?
Yeah.
Okay. Really important thing though is most houses here, especially modern houses, they have anti-siphon valve hose bibs.
Right.
So I don't know if you notice, you turn it off and water still drains out for a few seconds because the actual cutoff is back in the wall there. So a lot of people, especially new people, will make the mistake of keeping like a hose attached to their hose bib, and especially if it has like a on-off thing, you have water in the hose, and that means you're having water all the way into your hose bib into the house. So once we get into where we start to get consistent into the mid-20s especially, you don't want to have a hose connected all winter to your hose bib, or else you may have some freezing pipes if we get really, really cold. So yeah, a little bit of, if you're going to do a little winter watering here, it's nice to have a hose. It's maybe in the garage, it's not have frozen water in it, so you can go out, easy hook it to the hose bib, turn the water on and do a little extra watering. Otherwise, if you're like me, you forget about that and you have a frozen hose full of ice and you're throwing it out in the sun there trying to get it to melt off and stuff. So yeah, you bet. Now, I'll just get into real quickly some what I call indoor plants that are low maintenance. Cactus, there's a lot of cactus that aren't hardy. They're not hardy here, but they actually do really well for indoor plants. And I have quite a few. I have some at my house inside that I use for indoor plants. And they do like light, so make sure you have an area that are going to get quite a bit of light. Anything that's a cactus, succulents. There's lots of different succulents you can use indoors too. Just the key is having good light for them. The jade plant, very common. It'll grow up to a couple feet, maybe in a big pot. You can just nip it back if it's getting a little too big. And I kind of find with cactus, The pot, you keep it in a smaller pot, the plant itself kind of stays pretty small. So if you want to, if you want to let it get bigger, you just put it in a bigger pot. But I kind of find that most of mine are in like little 5 or 6 inch pots, and they've been in there for years, and the pot just kind of keeps the size regulated.
What's the watering?
For these type of things, I water mine once a week because generally they're planted in a pretty well draining soil. So but if you go on vacation for 2 weeks, don't sweat it. You're good. Even the succulents. If this starts drying out, all it's going to do is these succulent leaves here, they're going to kind of shrivel up. Give it water again, they fill back up, and they're good. So that's why if you're planting cactus succulents in a pot, something like a cactus mix, really good to use because it's good drainage. Because I stated before, a lot of people have trouble with succulents because they're not using a good drainage potting soil that drains well. So use a cactus mix for your succulents because it drains better. Aloes, there's several different types of aloes that do well indoors. Don't put it outside except in the summertime. It does well here in your house year round if you want. Or you can put it out in the summertime. You can put this out on your patio. Just remember to bring it back in before Sunday night this week.
When you say bring it in, is it like bring it into the house?
Yeah.
Or bring it into your garage?
Your house.
Into the house.
Yeah. Because this one here, like I say, it's a great house plant. You can use this in your house year round if you want. It'll do fine. But a lot of people will take their succulents. Once we warm up, they'll put them outside on their patio or deck or something. And they do benefit from that. They get more light, fresh air, etc. But you got to remember, from starting this Sunday on until end of April next year or whatever, to make sure you keep them in your house the rest of the year. Do they? Yeah, that lights, yeah. Yeah, that's the key. You have light in your garage, so that. And they kind of like that cool, almost. They kind of go in a dormant state almost, so they kind of like that as well. This is another aloe. This is the medicinal aloe, but this one is bigger. But they make great house plants, very low maintenance. Don't need a lot of water. Going on vacation 2 weeks, don't worry about it. House plant. Most house plants to me are pretty high maintenance. They're very touchy. But this one, the Sansevieria, very easy to grow. Likes a fair amount of light, but it's even not picky about light, to be honest. It's just, if you can't, anyone can grow one of these. And
anyone cannot kill one.
You can put it out in your patio if you want during the warmer season. That's fine too. And usually after a few years, you get to divide them up and you get to make more and give them to your friends and neighbors. Another one, they didn't have it here. It's euphorbia. They get really tall and they're kind of have a little milky sap to them, but it's another really, really easy house plant. So as far as what I call house plants, the Sansevieria and the euphorbias to me are some of the easy, no-brainer type of house plants to grow. And they don't need a lot of water too. That's the nice thing about the Sansevierias. They don't need a lot of water. And lastly, kind of throwing these in here because I like grasses. And overall, they're low maintenance. Drawback is they do need supplemental water, but there's a lot of cool grasses out there. This is a maiden grass. This is a dwarf one, which is nice. A lot of the maiden grasses are really tall and big. So if they're in the wrong spot, they're in the wrong spot and you're getting rid of it all of a sudden. But this one here is more of a dwarf, gets about 3 to 4 feet tall. And they're known for having their plumes of flower in the late summer, starting fall. And in the wintertime, they'll start to go dormant, start to die out, but these plumes last a long time, well into winter. I think leaving grasses up through the winter is really pretty because you get the wind, they may be going brown, But you have the wind kind of swaying them back and forth. They kind of add a little texture, a little interest to the winter as well. Then comes springtime, before springtime, probably December, January, or January, February. Just cut them back about 6 inches from the ground. Then they'll put up new growth again. And that's about the only time you really have to do anything with them is that yearly pruning. Grasses can be used great in containers too. That's the dwarf pampas grass. Okay, that's the dwarf pampas grass. I wouldn't put in that one as low maintenance because it, yeah, does well. They have some beautiful ones right out front there because it's a fair amount of work. You got to, pruning those back. They're big plants. It's a little more work on those. But some of these smaller dwarfer grasses, they're pretty easy. This one is standing ovation, little blue stem. This one is known to get this purple color in the fall. In the summertime, it's more of a greenish hue to the foliage, has little pretty flowers to it. Once again, I wouldn't cut this down. I'd leave it all winter long, even though it's kind of browning out. It has texture to it, some color to it. Can be a good container plant as well. But that's kind of what I have. Any questions?
On the yuccas, once they start blooming, how frequently do you expect them to bloom? Yearly?
The question was on the yuccas, once they start blooming, what's the frequency? Generally, it's not yearly, no. I seem to notice they'll skip several years and then they'll bloom again. But once they are done blooming, when the spike goes up, it's kind of a long process. It takes a couple months generally. You see the spike going up and then it flowers and it looks good for a few weeks. And, then after it kind of does that, then you cut the stalk off.
Is there I know there's different varieties of manzanitas. Are there some that are easier to grow than others?
The question was, there's several varieties of manzanitas. Are there some that are easier to grow than others? From a grower standpoint, yes, because generally any that you buy in a nursery are not the true native ones you're finding here because they're tough to grow in a container. So there's a lot of different varieties out now that have come out. This one's called Panchito. This one's a little more of a dwarf one. During the season, they'll get in 4 or 5 different varieties of manzanitas from growers, and some of them are taller, but they all have the characteristic of our native variety here with the red bark to them, and they do just as well once they're established.
So
Soil, well-drained soil for manzanita.
like their cactus mix? Is that a big?
Well, you're planting it in the ground?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you want to make sure you don't have clay soil for starters. If you have clay soil, don't try to do a manzanita. It's just not going to work. But if you're up in most parts of Prescott, especially in the hill area, it's decomposed granite, and they'll do well. They'll do fine.
I saw in my yard that have done very well, but there's this one spot that everything dies in.
Do you notice the soil's different?
Well, I didn't plant them, so I just planted
Yeah.
them in one spot where everything's dying.
No matter what you plant, it keeps dying?
Yeah. Yeah, I even bought one here that they said I couldn't kill when it died.
And it's on the
I do
same.
that all the time.
And when you're planting it, are you giving it because if it's on an established drip system, that's.
It was.
But I mean, you need to give it extra water in the meantime till the roots kind of grow.
I think
Then
I
it,
need to dig it out and put some kind of mix in it.
You-
I don't know what mix.
yeah, you might. I mean, I don't know what type of plants you're planting, but
I want one of those.
then I would probably go with a cactus mix. Do a heavy mix of.
Maybe put it on a mound where it can drain down.
You can do that too, but do a heavy combination of that mixed with your native soil, just so it drains good. You might try that, yeah. Generally, their premium mulch also works well for most things here. Planting when you're planting something, do about a 40% mix with this with your native soil. Works as well too. But for like what you're doing, or if you're planting cactus succulents in a container, the cactus mix I would go with versus this or a regular potting soil. Then one thing I also want to say is October is a really good month to get your last fertilizer in for your yard. And also, so they do have like the all-purpose, this is a 744. It's a good all-purpose fertilizer you can use spring, summer, fall here that they carry. And I don't know if, like, I kind of touched briefly, but this Sunday is probably our first freeze possibly. We're going to get in the high 20s. So if you have anything that you want to protect, bring it inside. Some of the stuff we talked about, if you put plants out for the summertime and you want to protect them more, probably today and tomorrow is your last day to get them in before they may possibly freeze. So
That's one of the key advantages to the garden club that I mentioned if you signed up in email, because particularly the first frost in the fall, it's kind of unexpected. Frankly, this year it's sort of early.
Yeah.
We typically will send out an email saying frost warning, and there'll be some stuff about how you should cover your plants and and all that kind of stuff. So it's more than just giving us a chance to send you stuff to sell you.
And that's especially in the springtime when, a lot of times you get your tomatoes, some of your plants planted early, or even just regular shrubs, you get them in a little early, get going, and then we're getting these surprise late freezes. Yeah, the email goes out, hey, we got a late freeze coming, protect your stuff, etc. So I'm going to be brave and try to protect my tomato plants still with frost cloth, because I got a lot of tomatoes still on there. I don't know if they're going to green up, but I'm going to try to keep the plant from freezing. Everything else I'm going to let freeze in the garden. But anything else?
For all succulents, do you recommend the cactus mix?
The question was, for all succulents, do you recommend the cactus mix? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it just gives it much better drainage. And that's key. All right, thank you.
Thank you. That was great, Jeff.